Okay, let's get into it. Today, we are launching what we're calling the Discernment Drop. And the source material we've been really sitting with is, well, it's arguably one of the most essential reads for understanding our current moment. The title alone is a profound shock. The Death of Reality in the Age of Consensus. It's a paper by Pastor John Widdifield.
It really hits you, that title.
It does. I mean, for generations, Western society, for all its divisions, it kind of held on to this basic idea of objective truth. The idea that reality exists whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
But Widdifield argues that whole agreement has just collapsed. It's been replaced by a system he calls interpretation management.
Right.
And our goal in this drop, just to be clear, isn't to debate the theological conclusions that John Widdifield comes to. It's really to synthesize the framework he presents. It's a powerful and really meticulous framework for understanding how we now manage and filter reality instead of just pursuing it.
And what's so fascinating is how clearly he identifies the new cultural currency. It's not money. It's not even data, really.
Yeah. What is it then?
It's nuance. He argues that nuance has become the new idol. We're not asking, is this true anymore? The question now is, how can we interpret this piece of data so that it, serves the consensus?
So it doesn't cause any trouble.
Exactly. So it minimizes offense, maximizes institutional stability. He says objectivity hasn't just died, it's been bureaucratized. It's been absorbed into the system.
Bureaucratized. That's a great word for it.
And the analogy he uses is one that really sticks with you. He says facts still exist, of course, but they're treated like hazardous material.
Wow.
Yeah. They're processed, relabeled, and then distributed in these small, emotionally acceptable doses. The goal of the whole information system, media, academia, tech, is to contain reality, to spin it and store it somewhere safe, where no one can accidentally get exposed to a sharp, inconvenient truth.
That hazardous material analogy is it's so insightful, because it perfectly explains this bizarre inversion we see happening in professional life.
It really does.
Pastor John Widdifield dedicates his whole introduction to this one symptom. Accuracy has become a professional liability, a risk.
It's upside down.
It is. He says it plainly. It's no longer falsity that ends careers. It's accuracy, if that accuracy disrupts the fragile consensus.
Which is just a mind-bending concept.
It is, and we see it played out so tragically. He cites the case from 2022 of Brian Pesta, a professor at Cleveland State University.
Right, I remember reading about this.
Pesta published research, and this was peer-reviewed research, suggesting a possible genetic component to IQ differences. Now, look, regardless of where you stand on that very controversial topic, the paper notes his data wasn't proven false, his methodology wasn't rejected.
No, he followed the rules. He did the science as it's supposed to be done.
Exactly.
And the paper argues that Pesta was dismissed not for an error in science, but for audacity. That's the word Widdifield uses, audacity, for having the gall to ask the wrong question.
A wrong question.
In an age where some areas of inquiry they're off limits. It doesn't matter what the data might say. He violated the consensus.
So the institution, in its role as what he calls an interpretation manager, it just decided that the social risk of asking the question was more important than the intellectual duty to find the answer.
Precisely. The fact that the research might have been accurate was completely irrelevant. The fact that it was disruptive, that was unforgivable.
And that's really the core of the problem, isn't it? The very institutions that were set up to champion free inquiry, the pursuit of radical, inconvenient truth, now seem to be championing the freedom to conform.
It's an intellectual protection racket, is what he calls it.
Yes. The interpretation managers, the bureaucrats, the editors, they treat the approved ideas like holy relics. But any challenging data, even if it's correct, gets labeled heretical or unlicensed, and it has to be suppressed just to maintain order.
And that's a key distinction Widdifield forces us to confront.
Yeah.
He's not saying that all controversial ideas are true, not at all.
No, of course not.
But he is saying that the mechanisms for deciding which ideas even get to be discussed have shifted. It's not about methodological rigor anymore. It's about ideological compliance.
Okay, so to really get the full weight of this, Widdifield says we have to look back. We have to understand the foundation that collapsed.
Exactly. He takes us deep into the ancient Western view of truth. He starts with this Latin phrase, adequatio re et intellectus.
Which sounds very academic.
It does, but its meaning is actually beautifully simple. It just means the alignment between the mind and reality.
Mind and reality.
Yeah. For centuries, truth was understood as this really demanding process where your subjective mind had to conform to objective reality. To what is. If you thought the world was flat, but it was actually round, your thought was just wrong. It didn't matter how many other people agreed with you.
Your consensus was irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant. The world itself was the standard.
And Widdifield, he traces that lineage so clearly, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, you see it from Plato and the Forms to Aristotle's First Principles, and then later, thinkers like Aquinas who synthesized it all.
Yeah. Placing truth ultimately in the mind of God. The whole intellectual project of the West was built on this external demanding standard.
It was.
And John L. Widdifield adds this other powerful layer, bringing in the biblical idea of truth as logos.
The word. Or even a person.
Exactly, from the Gospel of John.
Oh, yeah.
But this elevated truth, beyond just, an idea, it meant that speaking truthfully wasn't just a mental exercise. It was participating in the divine order of things.
It gave truth-telling this massive ethical weight, that older vision, the one grounded in correspondence, that the word has to match the world. That's what built the social trust, the scientific method, everything we kind of take for granted now.
It created a culture where searching for reality was a moral imperative.
Yeah, a moral imperative.
But then, as he notes, came the great inversion. The Enlightenment started with this huge confidence in reason, but that confidence eventually it fractured into suspicion. Reason turned on itself.
And that's the moment the postmodern thinkers rush in.
Right. To challenge the very possibility of that correspondence. You see it so aggressively with someone like Nietzsche, who claimed truth was just a mobile army of metaphors.
Language used to control people.
And then Foucault, arguing that truth is merely a product of power. Widdifield says the consequence of that is, well, it's huge. If you accept that, then the search for reality is abandoned.
In favor of controlling the meaning.
Exactly. Why bother conforming your mind to the world if you believe the world can be changed just by rewriting the language about it?
And that is the critical pivot point. That is where interpretation management is born. Once truth is just defined as power, the institutions that hold the liver's government, media, the academy, they claim the right to define what's meaningful, and therefore, what's real.
And the whole system is explicitly designed to filter that raw, inconvenient reality through a specific ideological lens.
All under the guise of safety or maintaining social stability.
So Widdifield gives us this really stark contrast. Two standards. The ancient world, built on correspondence, upheld the standard of accuracy.
Did the word match the thing, even if the thing was hard to look at?
Right. And now, in this modern age of consensus, the standard has totally shifted. It's moved to compliance.
The question isn't, is this word true anymore? The question is, does this word conform to the acceptable ideology? Does it preserve the comfort of the consensus?
It's about survival inside the system.
That's it, even if it requires you to, minimize your adherence to what's actually out there in the real world.
So we have the philosophical shift,
Yeah.
this inversion from reality to ideology.
Right.
But how does this system of interpretation management actually work in our daily lives?
Well, he outlines 4 key interlocked mechanisms.
Let's start with the one that really gets to the integrity of knowledge itself, academic bureaucracy.
Right.
For decades, we all sort of told ourselves that academic peer review was the ultimate guardrail for science. It was supposed to check for rigor. Was the experiment sound? Was the analysis correct?
Just the method.
Just the method. But Widdifield asserts that peer review has, it's metastasized. It's no longer just checking for method. It's now checking for morality, for ideological consensus.
Which creates this completely perverse incentive structure. An article can have perfect data, but if its conclusions violate the prevailing consensus on, say, race or gender or history,
it's rejected.
It's rejected outright. Or even worse, the researcher gets shunned. The source material points to the broader replication crisis, the work of scientists like John Ioannidis, who've shown how pervasive this bias has become.
And Widdifield argues this forces scholars into active self-censorship.
Of course it does.
They learn to frame their questions very carefully.
Or just avoid certain topics completely.
Exactly, because they know their funding, their tenure, their reputation. It all depends not on the accuracy of their results, but on the political palatability of their conclusions.
You're maximizing institutional survival, which by definition means you're minimizing your commitment to raw, uncomfortable truth. It turns the academic into a politician.
It's a profound corrosion of the intellectual engine of society, which leads to the second mechanism, the engine of public discourse. Media and technology gatekeeping.
The algorithm.
The algorithm. This is where that shift from the printing press to the algorithm becomes so consequential. The algorithm, by its very design, decides which facts get seen, which ones get to trend.
And Widdifield points out the cynical economics of it. What's profitable, what gets high engagement, which is often outrage, that gets amplified. It doesn't matter if it's true.
And the inconvenient stuff.
The inconvenient stuff gets demoted, labeled misleading, or effectively shadow banned. It just disappears from view.
So the press, in this environment, stops seeing its role as reporting external truth. Instead, it's curating a narrative to sustain engagement and maintain that preferred consensus.
The reality on the ground becomes secondary to the click count. This is management in its purest form. It's not censorship through law. It's control through visibility.
And that control of visibility connects directly to the third mechanism, which I think for a lot of people is the most disturbing, the government and corporate alliance.
Yes.
Widdifield grounds this in specific documented events. He references the Twitter files and other disclosures from recent years. This isn't theory, it's confirmed coordination.
No, this is documented.
We're talking about federal agencies, the DHS, the CDC, actively coordinating with major social media companies to flag, suppress, or just remove specific topics. And it wasn't just illegal content.
No, far from it. It was often factually accurate information that was just politically inconvenient on everything from energy policy to vaccine data.
And the consequence, as John Widdifield outlines, is this chilling of free inquiry. Freedom of speech is still there in theory.
In theory.
But in practice, it's being throttled by these digital gatekeepers who are acting as proxies for the state and for corporate interests. The platforms become the modern censors.
An outsourced regulatory state for ideas.
Exactly. And finally, that brings us to the most insidious mechanism, because it starts inside us. It targets our emotions. The therapeutic culture.
This one inverts the entire moral priority. Instead of valuing clarity or rigor, we prioritize emotional comfort, psychological safety.
Widdifield points to examples like students demanding safe spaces from ideas or trigger warnings for concepts that might cause discomfort. The definition of a moral good completely shifts.
It's no longer about confronting reality.
No. It's about achieving a specific, subjective, emotional state.
And that's the key. Truth is no longer measured by what it is, its correspondence to reality, but by how it feels.
So if a statement causes you distress,
that emotional state is instantly weaponized. Distress becomes the moral currency. The person speaking the inconvenient truth isn't seen as sharing information anymore. They're seen as inflicting harm.
Which allows for total interpretation management. Your subjective feeling dictates what the objective consensus has to be.
Right. And this next section is so important for grounding his whole critique. We move from the abstract mechanisms to the concrete reality.
The facts that refuse to go away.
Exactly. Pastor John Widdifield builds his argument on 6 fundamental facts that institutions are spending massive energy trying to manage or redefine out of existence.
And just to reiterate the goal of this discernment drop, he's using these case studies to illustrate how his framework operates. We're synthesizing his analysis of the language, not debating the policy issues themselves.
Right. These examples show how institutional narratives deliberately obscure physical or sociological reality to maintain the consensus.
Okay, let's start with case 1, biological sex. This is maybe the most heavily managed reality in our current discourse.
I'd say so.
Widdifield's assertion is just rooted in basic biology. Every nucleated cell in the human body has a sex marker, XX or XY. A binary structural reality.
And he addresses the complexity head-on. He acknowledges rare intersex conditions.
He does.
But he uses this really powerful analogy. He says that these rare conditions don't erase the underlying reality of biological sex any more than colorblindness eliminates the concept of color.
Or having 6 fingers eliminates the concept of having 5.
Exactly. The binary remains the statistical and functional reality of the species, but the managed interpretation insists on ignoring this. Widdifield points to the trend in medical schools of teaching that sex is assigned at birth.
A phrase, he says, has no biological meaning.
None. It's purely administrative. Assigning something implies a choice, but the biological facts are already there from conception. The management here is substitution. You replace a biological fact chromosomes with a subjective feeling gender identity.
Reality has to bow to self-definition.
That's the demand. It's a perfect example of compliance overriding correspondence.
Okay, moving to case 2, the unborn human. Here, the reality he focuses on is embryology, He's citing sources from, like, the National Institutes of Health.
The scientific consensus.
Right. The fact is this. From conception, a unique, genetically distinct sequence forms. It's alive, it has human DNA, and it's organically self-directed. It's directing its own growth.
But the managed interpretation uses very deliberate language to obscure that reality. The media, the legal world, they consistently call a zygote or embryo potential life.
As if it's just a philosophical opinion.
Right, waiting for some outside validation to be considered human. Widdifield finds this move chilling. He calls it moral anesthesia.
Moral anesthesia.
Wow. By using sterile, abstract language, products of conception, the culture avoids confronting the moral weight of the biological reality. This allows society to perform acts of violence against that distinct life while calling it a choice.
A choice that aligns with the therapeutic values of autonomy and comfort.
It's the highest form of linguistic manipulation. The words are designed specifically to obscure the facts to protect the moral comfort of the majority.
Okay, case 3 moves from biology to sociology, family structure, and father absence. Widdifield argues the data here is just as robust and just as managed.
And he's referencing major nonpartisan institutions. Brookings, Pew Research, the CDC.
The assertion, backed by all this data, is that children raised without a present, dedicated father face statistically higher risks across the board.
Poverty, incarceration, emotional instability.
The list goes on. And he argues this is a structural truth about human flourishing that should inform our culture.
And yet, the managed interpretation dictates a completely different public narrative. The consensus insists that families come in all forms, which, okay, descriptively that's true.
But it's used to insist that all forms are functionally equal.
Right. And Widdifield critiques this beautifully. He says it treats sociology like a form of manners. We're not supposed to state structural truth, like the unique necessity of a stable mother and father for optimal child development, because those truths violate a social consensus that insists on functional equality for all structures.
You avoid the structural truth to preserve the comfortable social narrative.
Precise.
Case 4 tackles a fundamental political reality,
Yeah.
freedom of speech and this modern obsession with disinformation.
He goes back to John Milton's Areopagitica on this one.
Yeah, reminding us that censorship is always designed to protect the power structure, not the people. The First Amendment exists to protect dangerous truth, not safe speech.
But the managed interpretation has replaced the old concept of heresy with the new administrative offense of disinformation.
And the new priests are the fact-checkers and content moderator.
Exactly. They're the ones who decide which opinions are dangerous, which data points are misinformation, and therefore which parts of reality become contraband in the digital world.
The effect is identical to historical censorship. Truth becomes regulated by those in power, but now it's wrapped in this neutral, scientific-sounding language of content moderation.
And he argues it doesn't eliminate false information. It just eliminates dissenting information, regardless of whether it's accurate or not.
Case 5 is maybe the most concrete, energy and physics. This is where political rhetoric literally hits a wall of thermodynamic reality.
He meticulously cites the International Energy Agency's 2024 World Energy Outlook.
The assertion is blunt. 80% of global energy still comes from fossil fuels, wind and solar, less than 10%. And he drives home the physical reality that always gets managed out of the discussion.
Which is that you can't have a zero-carbon manufacturing process. Every wind turbine, every solar panel, every battery requires a massive hydrocarbon infrastructure to even exist.
But the managed interpretation is political utopia. Governments promise a carbon-free future by dates that John Widdifield says defy physics.
The truth of energy density and baseload has to bow to the preferred political interpretation of environmental purity.
And to point out this thermodynamic reality
Is to commit eco-blasphemy. The management ensures everyone stays focused on symbolic gestures rather than confronting the complex reality of global energy.
And finally, case 6, the moral reality of evil. This is maybe the highest stakes interpretation management. It's about human nature itself.
Widdifield's assertion is that evil is real. It's a fact proven by the sheer scale of ideological death tolls in the 20th century. Communism, Nazism. The destruction they caused is the ultimate empirical proof that genuine wickedness exists.
Yet our modern therapeutic system prefers to avoid that sharp reality. We medicalize wickedness. We talk about dysfunction or trauma responses.
We pathologize sin. We treat it like a software bug that just needs a technical fix or a prescription.
And in doing that, Widdifield argues, We avoid the heavy moral weight that requires real confession and repentance.
Right. If it's just a software bug, you need a technician. The responsibility isn't on you. If it's evil, you need redemption. You need moral accountability. He concludes that no amount of perception management can fix what only truth can address.
So after laying out these 6 areas where reality is so actively managed, Widdifield pivots to the ultimate consequences, the creation of what he calls the therapeutic society.
And the core psychological damage is this. When truth, which is often sharp and uncomfortable, is treated as trauma, then courage, the very thing you need to face reality, gets labeled as pathology.
So you're not trained to master external reality anymore.
No. You're trained to cope with and manage your internal perception of it.
And this is where the language of comfort just completely takes over. Words like safety, inclusion, they're not just benign concepts anymore. Widdifield argues they become code for demanding conformity.
If a fact causes you emotional discomfort, it's by definition unsafe, and it must be removed from the consensus.
I found his critique here fascinating, but I do wonder, are we completely wrong to prioritize comfort sometimes? I mean, surely social harmony is a good thing.
That's a necessary challenge, and he's quick to agree harmony is desirable. But he says the therapeutic model pursues harmony through illusion, not through alignment with truth.
So it prioritizes avoiding offense over discovering truth.
Exactly. And the damage, as he sees it, is the creation of this massive systemic fragility that masks itself as compassion. If a population is successfully trained to treat cognitive dissonance as actual harm, they become incredibly governable.
Governable by euphemism.
That's his phrase. You can control their decisions just by adjusting the words, shielding them from the harsh realities of policy failure. Truth, once this powerful tool for liberation, has, in his striking phrase, been filed down to a spoon. It can only feed you, it can never cut.
And he doesn't stop there. With sociology, he traces this crisis all the way back to its theological root, to the serpent's strategy in the Garden of Eden.
Did God really say?
Exactly. It didn't start with an outright denial. It started with distortion, with doubt. That simple question introduced interpretive control. Suddenly, God's clear, revealed truth was up for debate. Obedience was replaced with opinion.
Which helps explain why the modern world feels, as Widdifield puts it, simultaneously intelligent and insane. We've mastered data, we can process billions of data points, but we've lost discernment.
We know how to collect the data, but not how to submit to its meaning.
And he concludes this section with a stunning critique. He says interpretation management is a counterfeit incarnation. It offers a promise of salvation, not through truth, but through total consensus.
It replaces the word became flesh with.
The word became policy. It's an institutionally managed redemption where conformity is what makes you safe.
And he ties this into the analogy of Babel reborn. The Tower of Babel wasn't just a building, it was the first technocratic project, a unified language weaponized against transcendence. They wanted to reach heaven on their own terms.
Without revelation.
Exactly. And he says the modern descendants are these digital networks, the global institutions that enforce sameness through managed language. The slogans of our day, diversity, equity, inclusion, they promise unity, but Widdifield argues they functionally deliver radical obedience.
By abolishing inconvenient truth, they try to build a global consensus that doesn't need to submit to any external divine reality.
But Babel failed. And Widdifield sees our current algorithmic utopias, managed by fact-checkers, as towers built on that exact same spiritual sand, attempting to unify humanity by controlling the dictionary, only to manufacture more confusion.
It's a pretty bleak picture of cultural wreckage, this collapsed correspondence between word and world. But the final section, it's not all doom and gloom. It offers a clear, very actionable path toward restoration.
And the key word there is costly.
Extremely costly. Pursuing truth in the age of compliance means accepting social risk right from the start.
So let's detail the 5 action points he outlines for recovery. They feel like real, practical acts of resistance against this fog of interpretation management. Number 1, speak plainly.
The foundational act.
It is. Consciously refuse euphemism. Call things what they are. Man, woman, life, death, truth, error. Widdifield sees every clear word spoken in public as an act of rebellion against the fog.
Euphemism is the primary tool of the interpretation manager. Plain speech just cuts right through it.
Number 2, anchor thought in creation, not consensus.
This means rooting our understanding of reality in the idea that facts are sacred, not changeable. They originate in external reality, in the created order, as he puts it, not in the fleeting mood of man.
Or the latest departmental memo.
Right. If you ground your understanding of biology or physics in the actual laws of creation, the arguments of the managers just lose all their power. They're not attached to anything real.
Number 3, re-sanctify speech.
Mm.
He elevates truth-telling beyond just expression. He argues that for a person of faith, a truthful sentence is a miniature incarnation.
Bearing the truth, the logos, into the world.
It means treating every word as something sacred, weighty, and subject to external reality, not our internal feelings. It's about stopping the use of language as a tool for social manipulation and just returning it to its original function, revealing what is.
Number 4, defend memory. This is so essential. It's a resistance tactic against a culture that constantly rewrites history for emotional safety.
Widdifield argues a society without an accurate memory can't repent. If you can't remember the real consequences of past actions, you can't confess. You can't correct your path.
Interpretation management wants to erase inconvenient history to preserve the current political narrative. So defending memory, the objective record, is an act of moral self-preservation.
And finally, number 5, recover courage. This brings us right back to Professor Pesta. Widdifield is completely direct here. Truth-telling in the age of consensus will cost you something.
You'll be penalized. You might be demoted, lose social standing.
And he says you have to accept that cost. Wear it as an honor. The prophets, the great truth-tellers, they weren't aiming for popularity. They were preserving civilization by refusing to lie.
And this all leads to the concrete goal, what he calls re-enchantment, a world where words and things match again. This means pastors preaching without apology, scientists publishing inconvenient data without fear, and citizens refusing to outsource their conscience to a committee or an algorithm.
So restoration begins when individuals choose reality over consensus, regardless of the backlash.
Regardless of the discomfort.
It's just a devastatingly powerful framework. John L. Widdifield leaves us standing in these ruins of a collapsed correspondence between word and world. The age of interpretation management promised safety and comfort.
And delivered confusion.
It delivered confusion and intellectual insanity. But he argues the foundations, the created order, the logos, they're still there under all the debris.
And his final, deeply provocative observation is what we really want you to carry forward from this, he says. When the world can no longer tell the difference between mercy and manipulation, when language is so managed that moral clarity is impossible, then clarity itself becomes the ultimate act of love.
Clarity as an act of love.
And ultimately, he brings us back to that core thesis, stating, freedom begins not in rebellion against authority, but in submission to reality. The rebellion against the structure of reality is what created this whole illusion in the first place. Submission is what grants liberation.
So our individual task, as the remnant who refuses to be governed by euphemism, is simple. Speak truth plainly until language itself is healed. Because, as John L. Widdifield reminds us, truth is not a trend. It is a person. Thank you for tuning into this Discernment Drop.